All right, so a lot of people, they rent for a while, like in their early 20s, maybe through college, get themselves established. And then a lot of people have the ultimate goal of buying a house. So your notes start out by saying, buying a house is a goal for many adults. There are some great advantages to owning a house instead of renting. There also is a lot of responsibility and risk that goes into making such a large purchase. Renting an apartment is sort of like a 1-year commitment. Buying a house is more like a 30-year commitment. So it's definitely a lot more extreme, but there are a lot of benefits that go along with it. So the first vocabulary term you'll see on your notes is a mortgage. A mortgage is a loan in which the property or real estate is used as collateral. The borrower enters an agreement with the lender is usually a bank, wherein the borrower receives cash up front, then makes a payment over time span until he has paid back the lender in full. So when you get a mortgage, basically the bank's going to give you this giant check that will cover the cost of the house. So maybe you find a house for $100,000. The bank gives you $100,000, but you have to use it on the house. So it's called closing. That's when you actually sign all the papers and the house is yours. You give that big sum of money right from the bank to the person who's selling the house, and then you pay the bank back. So technically the bank owns the house, you just live there. So if something happens where you stop paying, the bank takes the house back from you. So that's what it means when they say that the house is used as collateral. So it is your house, you are the owner, you own the house, you live there. But if you stop paying, the bank takes it back. Okay? That's what a mortgage is. When you sign up for a mortgage, you'll do the process what's called being pre-approved. Pre-approval is when the bank or the lender investigates your credit history and decides that you would be a good candidate for a mortgage up to a certain amount. So they will, look at your employment history, look at your pay stubs, look to see if you have any credit card debt or student loans. And they'll say like, hey, we're willing to give you a mortgage up to this certain amount. Like they said in the video we just watched, the amount that the bank tells you is usually a lot more than you want to spend because the bank wants you to go into debt. That's how they make extra money on you. The more you spend, the more interest you pay. And that's how banks make their money. And it sounds terrible, but banks kind of like when they get to take the house back. Like if you aren't making enough payments, they're going to end up like we saw in that maxed out video. The more in debt you are, the richer they're becoming. So they might say like, oh, we're going to give you $400,000 mortgage. You should not be looking at houses for that price. They always are willing to give you way more than you should be spending. So keep that in mind when they say, oh, you're pre-approved for this big giant amount. Don't spend it all. It's just more debt that you're accruing. Okay? You got to be smart about it. A realtor is the person whose job it is to act as an agent for the sale and purchase of buildings and land. So if you see like a for sale sign at a house, you don't just go knock on the door. You call a realtor, and the realtor makes an appointment and takes you to see the house. So a realtor is kind of the person who you ask your questions to, and then they talk to the seller. You don't usually work directly with the person selling the house. All right, so if you find a house you like, before you close on the house, there's a lot of steps that go into it. So before you sign all the final papers, you'll have the house under contract. So you both agree that, the seller agrees on a price, you agree on the same price, and you're going to start going through the process of signing all the papers. When you do that, usually they ask you for something called earnest money. It's money that you're paying just to show that you're serious about the house. So when you sign the contract that says like, hey, in 30 days, I'm actually going to buy this house from you, sometimes they want you to put a little money to show that you're serious. Because if they take the house off the market, if they stop showing it to other people and you back out, that's just money out of their pocket. So sometimes, it's not all the time, but they'll ask you to put a little money up front when you sign the contract. All right. The bank will only give you a mortgage for what the house is actually worth. So before you sign all the final papers, you'll have to get an appraisal. That's an estimate of how much something is worth. So when you get your home appraised, they send out a home expert to your house, and they look to see how much they think the house should be selling for. And then that's how much you can get a mortgage for. And again, if you stop paying the mortgage, then the bank takes the house back. So they want to know exactly how much the house is worth, because that's what they'll give you to pay for the house. They don't want to give you like $300,000 and you buy a $100,000 house, and then they have to take it back. They're not going to make their money. You also want a home inspection. They talked about that in the video a little bit too. That's where you hire a professional. He or she comes to the house and they check just to kind of make sure that there's no huge problems. Like they'll check to make sure the roof doesn't leak, and they'll crawl under the house and make sure there aren't any termites. And like when we had our home inspected, they figured out that we didn't have a sump pump, and they're like, yeah, your basement's gonna flood like the first time it rains. So then we had to tell the seller, like, hey, there's no sump pump in the basement, and then they paid to have one put in. So it kind of just helps you from getting in a spot where either something really goes wrong or something is really expensive to repair. A lot of times when you buy a house, the bank will want you to put down a down payment. That's an initial payment made when something is bought on credit or using a loan. You have a down payment too when you buy a car a lot of the times. It's just a % of the overall sale that you're paying for right at the beginning. Escrow is another word you sometimes hear. That's when you put a little money into an account that's held by a third party. So not the bank that you are getting your mortgage through, but another bank. And they will hold the money just to kind of make sure that everything runs smoothly. So like sometimes if there's a outstanding property tax bill, or if there's some sort of repair that maybe like you and the seller are like splitting, that money might go into the escrow account. It's just kind of an account to cover any costs that might come up to make everything run smoothly. Closing, that's kind of the big final meeting. When you're closing on a house, your realtor's there, you're there, the bank sends a person there, the seller's there, someone from the county is usually there to file all the paperwork about, like who's living in the house now. So the closing is a really important meeting. When you close on a house, you sign like 100 papers. You feel like you're signing your life away. But that's kind of where everything happens. And there are some costs associated with closing. And then that's also something you can negotiate when you're negotiating on the price of the house. You can also negotiate who's going to pay for the closing costs. When we closed, the closing costs were a couple $1,000s. It's money that goes like to the county to change over the paperwork, and the realtor fees are in the closing costs. And it's just, again, buying a house, like it seems like there's 25 people involved in the process, and every single person wants a little bit of money out of it. So that's what's those fees that happen when you actually purchase the house. Those are called your closing costs. Any questions so far? It's a lot of information today. I'm sorry. Buying a house it's super fun, but it's like real stressful, and there's a lot that goes into it. Questions so far? All right, let's get to the actual math. Oh, nope, there's one more thing. So this is probably what you will need to consider, in the next couple years. Do you want to be a renter or do you want to be a buyer? So when you're renting, some things to keep in mind are there are fewer upfront costs, and there's a lot less paperwork when you're moving. Renting, I keep saying, is kind of like a one-year thing. It's a place to live. You probably aren't going to want to raise a family in a little tiny apartment. I don't know, maybe you do. But one of the benefits is you don't have to have a down payment. It's a lot less paperwork. You're not responsible for the damages. Like if there's a washer and dryer in your unit and one of them breaks, you don't have to pay for it. You just call up your landlord and they take care of it. So that's kind of nice. It's easy to relocate when you're renting. You're not stuck there. You don't have to wait for someone else to buy the place. Which, like it says on the next one, it's less financial responsibility. And when your lease is up, you are free to go. with no penalties. You just sort of take up and take off. Buying, there are some benefits to buying a house. The biggest one for buying a house is that you build up equity. So I still owe money on my house. I still pay every month. I pay a mortgage. But I could sell my house like tomorrow for more than I still owe the bank. So I would use some of that money to pay the bank off. And then the rest of the money I would just get the cash for. So, but again, I've been paying money each month for the last 7 years. So would it cover those costs? I don't really know. I haven't sat down and done the math on it. But you do build what's called equity. So it's kind of a good feeling like, hey, if I needed money right now, it would take me a couple months to sell the house, but you would get ideally, a big sum of money when you make a property sale. There's no landlords to deal with. If I want to paint the walls purple, I can paint the walls purple. It's my house. When you buy a house, you do get some tax benefits just because it is so expensive to buy a house that you get a break on your taxes that year usually. Long term, it's a little bit more stable. At the end of your lease, they can't kick you out. You own the house. So it's kind of nice to know this is where I'll be for a while. It's good for your credit score. It shows that you can make payments continually. So then you'll end up getting, better deals on loans and mortgages later on when you show that you can pay for something like a mortgage every month. And you can make changes as you wish. If you want to remodel the whole kitchen, you can't do that in an apartment, but you can do that when you own the house. So that's something to consider. Any questions on the difference between renting and buying? All right, so here's a big one, and like I said, the bank will often give you way more money than you should be spending. They want you to get in debt. That's how banks make money. So this says it's recommended that your mortgage is no more than 2.5 times your annual income, and that's the annual income for the house. So if you're single, it would just be your income times 2.5. If you're married, you and your spouse ideally would put your money together and use that money to buy a house. So you add the... Something's making some noise. Thank you. All right, so you add your income with your spouse's income and then you multiply by 2.5. Any questions? All right, we also are going to talk about calculating down payment today. So this is one of our vocabulary words, but a little more information on it. Some banks require that you put a down payment down on your house before they agree to give you a mortgage. Down payments can range from 5% to 20% depending on the type of loan. But in general, the more money you pay at the beginning, the less money you're borrowing, so the less interest you're paying. So the bigger the down payment, the better, but that's more money you have to come up with. So when you're calculating the amount of the down payment, it's the cost of the home times the percent of the down payment. So if it's 5%, if it's 20%, you multiply the price of the home by that, and that would be your amount for your down payment. As far as calculating your monthly mortgage payment, like how much you actually pay the bank, there is so much that goes into that as far as like how much you borrow, what your interest rate is, what was your down payment, how long is the loan. So instead of teaching you guys this big long equation, I'm just going to show you what an online mortgage calculator looks like. So this says the monthly mortgage payments are really hard to calculate. It's recommended that you use an online mortgage calculator. They do a really good job at calculating your mortgage. A lot of them will show you graphs, like how long it will take to pay off, how much of that is actually going towards the cost of the home, how much of that is just interest that the bank is making off of you. So the one that I use the most often is wolframalpha.com. However, if you just Google mortgage calculator, like hundreds of them pop up, and we'll practice using one of those at the end of the notes. Any questions so far? So the first two examples are all about the like how much should you be spending on a mortgage, like what type of houses should you be looking at. So this says, Deshawn makes $40,000 a year. What is the maximum amount she should get a mortgage for? So her household income, if she's looking by herself, is $40,000. What do we multiply that by to find how much? 2.5. Good. So she should not be spending more than 2.5 times her annual income when she's looking at a house. Anyone know what that amount is? $100,000. So that would be her budget on a home. So there are websites like realtor.com. You could put in there like, don't even show me the big houses, only show me houses between this amount and this amount, and they'll show you the ones that you can afford. Now, in example 2, there are 2 people. So it says Aaliyah makes $35,000 a year and her husband, Darion, makes $50,000 a year. What's their budget? So you can buy a bigger house if there's 2 people paying for it. So first you have to find the household income. How would you do that? Add them together. So $35,000 plus $50,000. Their household income is what? $85,000. So you take that number times the 2.5 to see what kind of a house they should be looking at or could be looking at. Anybody have it? Perfect. So obviously when there's 2 adults bringing home the money, you can get a bigger house. Any questions on sort of the recommendation of the maximum amount you should be looking at? In example 3, we're looking at Brandy. Brandy wants to put 10%, it's missing the percent, 10% down on her first house. The house is listed at $120,000. How much should Brandy plan on paying on her down payment? So we want to do the cost of the home times the percent of the down payment. Now, you can type it in as 10 and then hit the percent button, or you can jump the decimal up 2 places and multiply it like that. So you can do times 0.1 without the percent button or times 10%. Either way, does anyone know what you get? What is it? 12,000. Yes. So if she wanted to put 10,000 down, she shouldn't even start looking till she has $12,000. All right, Lamar found a house he loves for $80,000. The bank told him that he needs to put down at least 20% down at the cost of closing. How much money does Lamar need? So how am I going to start this one? What should I do? 80,000 times, and you can do 20% or you can do 0.2. Anybody know? 16,000. All right, questions on those 2? The next one, I'm going to have to type it in up on the computer for you. So we'll pause here. So here is an online mortgage calculator. You can see it's mortgagecalculator.org, so pretty standard. So we want to know the cost per month for what? $200,000 home. So 200, 1, 2, 3. We want a down payment of 10%. What's the interest rate on number 5? 3.5%. Okay, 30 years. We're not worried about any of that stuff. So calculate. All right, so here is the monthly payment for this situation. $808.28. So that's the last example in our notes. There's one more in the homework where you have to do an online mortgage calculator, so we can do that one together on the board. But as far as the notes go, do you guys have any questions? All right, here comes your homework. All right, so number 5 on your homework, it's a $225,000 house, right? How much down? 10%, okay. 4.5 is the interest. She needs one more copy. Oh, the person in front of you didn't pass it back. There you go. All right, 25 years or 30 years? 30 years, okay. So all that information is correct? All right, let's hit calculate. All right, so here is the monthly payment. $1,026.04. The rest of these you should be able to do with just a calculator. There's just one online calculator.